welcome everybody to Going Green, why sustainability matters to your business more than you'll actually think, and hopefully that will be the outcome of today's webinar. You'll take something away thinking, I didn't know that. So hopefully that is what you will learn. So very quickly, our speakers today. So it's myself, John Ellis, who is the head of marketing here at Dale, and now self-professed net zero champion. I think I might have to come up with a better title than that, but nevertheless, that is what I've come up with for now. And Catherine Barnard, and I'll let Catherine introduce herself now.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Catherine, and I am a co-founder and director at Working the Future. We provide work trend intelligence to organisations, and we help organisations with future-proof people strategies. And I'm really pleased to be here today. It's a really interesting one for us because when we started scoping out webinars in partnership with Dale, we offered the sort of the green agenda up as a possible topic. And in the meantime, obviously, events have kind of run away with themselves, and we've had COP26 and the IPCC report. So I'm really looking forward to getting stuck in this morning with John.
Thank you, Catherine. So very quickly, why are we here? And hopefully that picture gives it sets the scene. Really, we're here because of obviously the big topic, the planet, but also we're hopefully here to highlight how the climate crisis is actually going to affect your business, and actually more than you think, and probably in a shorter time frame than you think. It's not just about hitting those 1.5 degree targets, about how we actually sustain and how you make a sustainable business moving forward with the climate crisis and the changes that are going to come from it. And as Catherine just alluded to there, one of the main reasons that we at Dale wanted to look at this topic is that we want to bring you along for our journey, really. So we're going to go on a net zero journey, and we're not going to profess that we know everything, because we don't. We're not experts in this field yet. But what hopefully this webinar is, it's a learnings. We're going to pass on what we've learned, some of the risks we've seen to our business, and what you'll probably find will be a risk to yours, and some of the starting points, and hopefully give you an overview of the things that you need to consider when you're looking to attack a net zero, carbon neutral future, really, for your business. So hopefully that is what you'll get from today. And I will now pass over to Catherine.
Thanks ever so much. Yeah, so for us, one of the trends, we track 10 trends at Working the Future, and we create an annual trend analysis report. And we placed climate change and resource depletion into that agenda some time back, but it always felt like a bit of a far off existential threat, really. And I think the publication of the IPCC report in the summer of this year, followed by some of the dialogue at COP26, which was last month, I think has really placed now business sustainability first and foremost on the agenda of most boardrooms. And when we started to organise and plan for this webinar, we wanted to really dig into, well, what actually is business sustainability. And we came up with two definitions, one of which, as you can see on the screen there, links to the environment and climate change, and the other actually is kind of broader, which is you know, the ability of being able to continue over a period of time. And both of those two statements are true, and they're both kind of inextricably linked, if you will. So I thought, you know, when we were planning, it was a good idea to kick off with a definition that we can all agree on. So if we flip over to the next slide, for us, when we look at business sustainability or organizational sustainability, we think that there are two things in play. One is the sustainability of the workforce, the people that actually contribute to your organization to create positive outcomes, and then obviously environmental sustainability. If you take either of those two out of the equation, you are putting your business at significant risk. So I think we'll just do a really quick fly through of some points about workforce sustainability this morning, but I think we've agreed we're going to come back and visit that topic in more detail in 2022. We're this morning going to focus predominantly on environmental sustainability. So I think one of the things that we've noticed, and I'm sure everybody on this webinar this morning has noticed over the course of the last 20 months, is just how important well-being is. I think it's true to say that the pandemic and enforced and prolonged working from home, working remotely, lockdowns, etc., has had a detrimental impact on everybody's well-being. And certainly the charities that that support mental health and well-being are noting a definite uptick in well-being issues. 1 in 4 people, this is pre-pandemic data by the way, but 1 in 4 people in the UK will experience a mental health issue of some kind every year, according to the mental health charity Mind. If we flip over to the next screen, we can say absolutely unequivocally that stress and anxiety are on the rise in the pandemic age. People have got a lot to be worried about. Gallup, the global analytics firm Gallup, is tracking mental health at work as being a key issue affecting performance in the 2020s. And in fact, Deloitte earlier this year in its annual millennial report fed back that 40% of millennials and Gen Zs are feeling anxious, but also furthermore feeling that their employers have not done what they could have done in respect of supporting mental health and well-being over the course of the last 20 months. So these are big topics that we will, as I say, address in 2022, but just wanted to park those observations and those data points just there for now. I think, again, if we were to surmise what we believe to be some of the major causes of workforce stress in the 2020s, we would say pandemic is absolutely up there. Job security, people are incredibly worried about their jobs and whether or not they've got, you know, money at to put on the table to feed and provide for themselves at the end of the month. Loneliness is another key issue. We may dig into that again in 2022. And of course, the climate crisis. You know, we're starting to see people express quite significant concerns about the climate crisis and what we can all do at an individual level and what we can do as a collective force. So let's dive in. We're going to start quickly with a poll just to find out whether you in the audience today have already set about a plan to reduce your organisational carbon footprint. So if you want to just reply to that, and then whilst we're waiting for you to complete the poll, we'll move on into the next slide. So as it stands, according to our analysis, organisations are actually responsible for 35% of global emissions. Now, obviously, there is data out there pointing to a certain subset of organisations that are predominantly responsible for global carbon emissions, and you'd naturally assume that organisations that are in the petrochemical space or heavily invested in plant, machinery, manufacturing, etc., would be more dominant players in the field of carbon emissions. But actually, what we found out as we've been preparing for the session today is that it's more complex than that. and that actually there are 3 scopes that have been defined by, who actually was it? It was, you told me this the other day, didn't you, John? And I've now, who was it that had?
I've also forgotten, I'll be honest.
No, I've got it.
That much research.
It's the Science-Based Target Initiative, and you can look that website up online, and you will find that there are 3 scopes under which we all fall as business entities. So when we factor in scope 3 considerations, which we're going to explain to you in a minute, you'll find that business, any business, produces 85% of carbon emissions. Have we got the results to the poll, guys?
I just wanted to double check if people can actually see it, because we don't seem to have any participants in the poll, bizarrely. So I just want to double check everyone can see it. I know we can see it.
Maybe if we're not, it's going to be difficult to understand that one. Maybe we've had a bit of a technical glitch on that one, or maybe that people don't want to say.
An error message came up, it's saying in the chat bar, so perhaps we haven't been.
Thank you very much.
I tried to submit okay.
Thank you very much.
Well,
thanks for letting us know. If we crack on, and Pat, do you want to?
Or what I could do is if people, okay, yeah, we'll crack on. Yeah,
we'll crack on. Zoom.
Okie dokie. So if we dig into these scopes, and again, you know, apologies if we're repeating something that you already know, but when we found out these data points, our heads were blown off. I feel as if I need to defer to you a little bit on this, John, because you had done most of the digging, and you provided a far more succinct explanation than I did when we were running through in rehearsal.
Well, I think one of the things that I found was that when I started doing this, I thought this would be easy, and then realized it is a bit of a rabbit warren of information. And really, this is where it all starts, is these scopes, and it's understanding where you emit is one of the biggest areas that you need to understand, really. So they've split it up into three scopes. Scope 3 is kind of split up into then 2 sub-scopes, but we'll go into that hopefully a little bit later. But essentially, scope 1 emissions are the things that, the easiest way to put it is that we as a company, or you as a company, directly control. So things like your facilities that you run, company vehicles, anything where you directly control and then emit are what we would class as scope 1. Scope 2 are things like the power, electricity and gas utility services that you buy in. So whether they're sustainable, how is for instance that electricity being generated? Is it being generated via a coal power station, or is it being done by offshore wind? And then you've got scope 3, which is actually probably the one which is the most difficult. It's the most difficult to quantify, but also the most difficult one I think it's going to be for many businesses to get their head round. And that is looking at items you as a business buy in, but also looking at how sustainable if you, for instance, approach or services when they go out the other door that you supply to other people, how they get used, and then how much of an impact the product that you produce has on the environment. So kind of your upwards and downwards scopes, really. So it's a real minefield, and we will go into these in more depth, but that is a quick overview, because really you just need to understand what the scopes are to obviously be able to understand probably the next couple of slides, I'd say, Catherine.
Yeah, so scope 1, in conclusion, just to be clear, so scope 1 is, as a business, the emissions produced by your facilities or your company car fleet. And I asked you the question, didn't I? And you clarified for me, that is company car fleet. It's not the vehicles owned by your workforce. It's anything that you own on your balance sheet as a company vehicle. Correct. Scope 2 is any power or resources that you use and that sits on your balance sheet as a cost of business. So water, gas, electric. And then scope 3, in my mind, the way I computed this was goods and services that you buy into the business, goods and services that you sell on from the business. And so what we're saying in essence is that according to the way in which this has all been segmented up by the powers that be for the purposes of determining what your organisational carbon footprint is that there are these 3 scopes, and we're actually going to focus predominantly on scope 1 today because we think that that's possibly the best starting point. We as business owners have got the most influence over scope 1. However, in our findings, we've made some discoveries about the whole piece that you guys need to be aware of if you're not aware of already. So shall we push on? So just to revisit where we're at, I think you might have had to have been asleep in the summer of this year if you didn't notice the headlines about the IPCC report, although regrettably they got buried quite quickly by, I think it was Afghanistan and what was going on there that sort of superseded in the newsreels the impact of the IPCC report. But what that report revealed was that human beings are absolutely responsible for the climate crisis, that human beings in the last 50 years have caused a mass extinction to all kinds of wildlife species, and that our human consumption habits are singularly the most significant contributor to fossil fuel usage. So we are to blame, and that's all there is to it. If we move along, we know also, by the way, sorry, just flipping back to that previous slide, we absolutely know that we have to try and get to our carbon emissions to within that 1.5 degree of heating. It is not going to be straightforward, as we probably all know. There were several countries at COP26 who didn't commit to that 1.5 degree heating. So we've got our work cut out. We absolutely know that. I think if you have any feeling of responsibility, you'll probably be like us and thinking, well, gosh, what can I do at a micro level? What can I do personally? What can I do in my household? And what can I do if I own a business, and so on and so forth? What we hadn't really appreciated was some things that have taken place behind the scenes, which John dug out, particularly pertaining to government procurement policy. John, if you can explain this, then I'll take over.
Yeah,
afterwards.
so I think I may be out on my own on here, but I don't mind saying it, that sometimes I struggle with understanding how I can make a difference in this, what is possibly a global challenge. So I like to try and look at piecemeal bits of how can I understand how I can support something that will actually make a difference in my head, that's a little bit smaller. So supporting my business was where I was thinking, and then the supporting the planet will come as a byproduct. So started looking into what risks there may be to business, and there was a couple of standout things that at first glance maybe don't appear to be huge issues for smaller business, just like your blue chip organizations, which you think, well, that's their problem. But you start to look at it a little bit underneath the skin of it, and you start to see that it could be huge issues for organizations of all sizes. So the first one that came up was this PPN 0621, government procurement policy. What a wonderful and very catchy title. But inevitably, it's if you want to do any business with government, any procurement with government, to the value of 5 million, you will have to, from I think it was the end of September this year, stated what your net zero plan is. You've got to have set out a plan of how you're going to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, and you've got to have published that on your website. Otherwise, you won't be considered for those contracts. So again, you might be thinking, I don't deal with the size of deal that you were talking about there. But there is underlying thinking to that, and that's why we told you about the scopes. And I'll just quickly go on to the next one, which was again another thing that came out of COP, though this one was that they're mandating by 2023, and they're expecting this to become law very soon, that all large organisations in the UK must do the same. They must have a plan, they must publish it, and they must also publish and show how they're going to achieve it every year against their promises. So it shows that big business is going to have to prove how they're going to achieve this. But as we've shown there with scope 3 considerations, the only way these larger organizations are going to be able to hit their own targets is by looking at their supply chains. So if you're part of a supply chain in any way, or if you want to deal with any large organization, any government organization, or any business that works with government, eventually, may not be tomorrow, may not be next month, but eventually in the coming years, their gaze is going to look at their supply chain. And if you're part of one of those supply chains, they're going to be then asking you about what is your plan moving forward. Because if you as a supplier to them don't have a plan, they can never hit their target. So then guess what? They'll probably look for somebody who can support them with their overall carbon neutrality. So just those two that came about, and there'll be more in the coming years, I would imagine, more legislation and more rules coming forward. But I think it does very starkly highlight that, yes, big business is going to get squeezed, and therefore they'll squeeze as they go down their supply chain funnel, things that they buy in, things that they sell. They'll require organizations of all sizes to really follow suit, and will get left behind. And that was the thing that popped into my head when I was reading this, is that our business has the fear of getting left behind if we don't attack this problem now and get started. Doesn't mean we have to go from 0 to 100, but we need to at least start our journey. Otherwise, when we get to the point where we probably get forced to do it, it will cost the business, and it'll probably cost the environment, because we'll have to do things quicker. So I think those two really stuck out for me as real business risks. So yeah, that's where we were with this thing. So
it kind of sounds like, I mean, that is a top-down pressure, isn't it? And it's quite a coy, subtle way of enforcing the business community to change the way it conducts business and reports on its business. It sounds very much to me as if evidencing your efforts to reduce your carbon footprint organisationally is going to become a staple of any tendering process. And I think that is the point that kind of hit us between the eyes most, is that even if you think, oh, we're a knowledge economy business, we don't really have any, we don't trade in tangible products, we've got a minimal carbon footprint, etc., there is literally no getting away from this, because we are all going to have to measure and record the steps that we're taking to become less and less carbon intensive. There's another side to this whole debate that we just want to bring to your attention really quickly. I think another reason why environmental sustainability is becoming a commercial imperative is because of the rise of employee activism. I'd love to speak to any organisations at the moment who are immune from the Great Recession, but I'm imagining that most organisations are experiencing some staff turnover. And as we talked about in the previous webinar, what modern workers want is significantly different to what we thought they wanted a decade ago. And what we're seeing is that employees are starting to vote with their feet now in terms of whether or not they perceive their employers and their leadership teams to be standing as a force for good in the world. And we can't underestimate Gen Z as a workforce demographic has got the most to lose in this debate because they're going to be around for longest. So they will typically be most invested in seeing their employers or organisations generally act as a force for good and do what's necessary to reduce the carbon emissions. And the other thing to know is that because Gen Z particularly is more activist, employee consumers have no qualms about boycotting or publicly shaming organisations they believe to be behaving irresponsibly apropos of the climate. And then you've got a PR disaster on your hands. So those are some other points to consider, which, you know, you may or may not agree with the sentiment of those people, but we now live in a hyper transparent and hyper connected world where, you know, at one wrong turn and you have got that public relations disaster on your desk to deal with. So we just wanted to pause for a second and reflect on a quote that Mark Carney made in 2019 before he stepped down as the head of the Bank of England. And I know that he is becoming increasingly vocal and activist in his statements about the environment. The mood in the room in the financial sector now is that organisations that do not embrace decarbonisation strategies are simply not going to survive. So it's that existential now, it's an absolute imperative. Like, if we got the poll going, did we manage to go back to the last poll, or are we?
This new one seems to be working fine, so I'll put the results up shortly.
Okay,
no
lovely.
gremlins on this one, fortunately.
Perfect. So yeah, so you know, having kind of run through those points previously, I guess the question to the floor is, do you think environmental challenges pose a risk to your business? What time have we got? We've got 20 minutes now, haven't we, to really crack on and work our way through scope 1. So shall we move to the next slide?
Yes, let's go for it.
Okie doke. So getting started, let's dive into scope 1 and what we've learned. Let's share what we've learned.
Do you have the results, Patrick? I'm intrigued to know before we get started. There you go. That's interesting. Nice 50-50 split.
Yeah, okie doke. Well, so I will admit, the first time I looked at this slide, I was kind of a bit blown away by what it seemed to be. There seemed to be a lot of information on this slide. As I said before, I think we're going to just prioritize scope 1 today, but I think we'll run quickly through scope. I mean, scope 2 to me, I don't know whether anyone disagrees, but scope 2 to me seems quite straightforward. You know, the utilities that you pay for on a monthly or quarterly basis to get your, you know, to get your work done. That's kind of straightforward. But let's run through scope 1 and scope 3.
So yeah, I think, well, looking at that poll, there may be a few people that already know about this already and probably know a bit more than I do. But hopefully I will be able to communicate this as succinctly as possible. So as we already alluded to, scope 1 is probably the one that is the one that's easiest for you to control. May not be the easiest one to implement because it is quite, there are some big factors in it. And we also have cheekily added something else into this column, but essentially it distills down to the company facilities. Everything from, you know, just people turning off lights, etc., and how you make them more efficient, how you make the facility work harder and produce less, really, in terms of its carbon footprint, or just in general, it's just any kind of emission. Then you've got company vehicles. So again, if you've got a large fleet or you've got company cars, again, that is another one that you can slowly start to look at, and in a few other webinars that we've seen that I've used as research material for this. you know, a lot of companies have been slowly shifting to hybrid or full electric vehicles. That becomes more difficult for organizations that are running, you know, delivery trucks and things like that, because the technology maybe just isn't quite there yet. But again, a lot of organizations have started these a long time ago, and it's a slow transition. It's not about changing your entire fleet overnight. And I think that's probably one of the big takeaways from today, really. It's don't be fearful of getting started. Start your journey, very much like we are doing. Don't stick our heads in the sand any longer, and get started, and start picking off the low-hanging fruit. And then we've added change of behavior in scope 1, because really, inevitably, the people that work in your organization are going to help you drive change, and they need to come along for the ride. They need to be invested into it as well. You probably find that there are a lot of people that are already invested in being more sustainable, but you'll have people that aren't, and it's just about making those easy choices for people, making it easy for people to make more sustainable choices, and getting the entire workforce involved will mean it's just a better environment for everybody. That links back to the whole ideas of mental health and well-being as well. You know, it's a circular thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would just add to that really quickly. I think, you know, don't feel anxious or overwhelmed by the idea that you have got to enforce a behavior change within your organization, because in all the work we've done across the last 4 or 5 years, we've consistently found that individuals want to be involved and want to help share that responsibility. So you'll find that changing, you know, as and when we eventually get back to the office full time, all of us, if that, you know, happens, or whether we're hybrid distributed or what have you, changing the shape of behavior across the work team will be easier than you think. There's some tools and techniques we'd advise upon, but it's not insurmountable. I think scope 3, I like the way that you've put this diagram together, John. So we've got these upstream activities, which applies loosely. My interpretation is everything that you buy into your business to produce value, and then downstream activities, everything that you sell in your business to create value.
Yeah, I think that's probably the easiest way to look at it. I think there's a few nuances to it, but yeah, it is essentially if you distill it down, it is just very much that. Very, very quickly, I would just say about scope 2, you know, we did highlight it, and Catherine is right. It's probably one of the easier ones, maybe not at the moment, because it is difficult to find a tariff that is any good at the moment. But I think when you are looking to renew any of your utilities, the idea of looking into providers that offer renewable energy sources is a great way to do it. So, you know, I'm currently on, I think probably the just personal home utility services. I think people seem to be jumping on more renewable providers, and again, it's looking at those and how you can actually buy in utilities that are sourced via more sustainable processes. But yeah, scope 3, this is where the minefield happens for me. This is where my mind exploded.
I was just going to, sorry, just to cut across, just going back to scope 2, because we were talking about this the other day. I think on the topic of scope 2, if you own your real estate and you haven't done this already, it is definitely worth looking at whether or not there's viability in adding solar panels to your roof, because what you get, obviously there's an upfront investment, but what you get is basically free energy. Once that's installed, you get free energy at certain peak points during the day. And if you don't own your real estate and you're leasing, and your superior landlord has made the decision to harvest solar energy, there ought to be a kickback for you as a tenant, in that at certain points of the day, at certain points of the year, you ought to be able to benefit from that low cost, no cost energy. And in the scope of, you know, demonstrating that you're taking proactive steps organisationally to mitigate your carbon emissions, those are things, you know, that I would class them as reasonably low hanging fruit, and definitely worth an ask if you've got, you know, if you're aware, for instance, that your superior landlord is going down that pathway. You ought to be able to somehow benefit from that cheaper energy provision.
Yeah, hopefully I'll give a small story of an organisation that has moved to a sustainable business park, and that's an interesting look at how the landlord actually controls all of the utilities, and how it's like just everything's pretty much sustainable on site, which is really interesting. But yeah, completely right. But if we do look at scope 3, and this is the one where the larger organizations that we talked about earlier, and that kind of forcing that push downwards, that's where they'll start to look as they move through their journey and trying to find obviously more sustainable supply chains to them. And really, as you said, Catherine, if we look to the left, the upstream activities, it's the things that you're buying in, and really it hit quite hard with an organisation like Dale, whereas we buy in a lot of product to support obviously the build process in a design and build office fit. So, you know, looking at how we make that more sustainable, we've done projects recently, and we have started to, you know, with clients that are really invested into it, starting to look at, you know, just simple things like the purchase goods, you know, are they created with more sustainable products? You know, are the processes to manufacture them more sustainable? The transportation, you know, can we buy it locally? Can we use local tradespeople, for instance? And it's about that transportation. If we can't negate it, reduce it, and if we can offset it at the moment, can we offset it? So it's things looking at like that. The waste, and again, hit home with an organisation like ours, but you know, the amount of waste that we produce, and that's then brought about new ideas that we're hopefully going to implement in 2022. So actually looking at these upstream scope 3 activities, it's made us think actually we can do things differently, and that's actually born some new services, which is a fantastic way to look at it. So sometimes it's actually going to be it could be a real opportunity if you start to think about these issues. Fuel and energy, we all have to use it. So it is, you know, looking at, I think probably the pandemic highlighted more than anything really, you know, and probably linked with that business travel and that employee commuting. Do you need to be in the office that day? Do you need to drive to that meeting? Can you actually do that meeting over Zoom on this occasion? There'll always be points where there's real value of doing things in person, but I think one of the main things we found is that not everything has to be done in person. There are some meetings which are more than fine and actually work better over some kind of Zoom or conferencing system, or just over the phone really. So there's a few things there. Those three really link together of just changing, and again links back to that scope 1 idea of changing behavior. You know, behavioral change in the business, the ways you work. It could be a real way of reducing down your indirect emissions. And then leased assets, you know, if we used to lease a satellite in a co-working space, and again it's making the choices of, you know, what does that lease, what does that provider offer in terms of renewable energy sources, how sustainable is that? And then you're looking down the scope 3, so the things that hopefully you produce, and you know, it's that long-term effects. So again, that transport and distribution network of getting your product or services to somebody, the idea of, you know, can you make your processes to generate and create those products better and improve those processes so they become less harmful? And then going even further down the scale, how people use your product, and then how they come to, when it comes to the end of life of that product. It's you know, I think you use the analogy of a technology product. You know, once that laptop has come to the end of its life, how does it get? How does it go back and
get disposed of?
Yeah, and get disposed of, or can it be renewed? Can it go back? Can it go, you know, somewhere else, and some of the component parts be used again, and that recycling culture? And then obviously, even if you do a lot of investments, and it's about investing in the right companies that are doing things the right ways, you know, and how you use your investing in new companies. And I think all these are huge considerations. And I think that's why we said with scope 1 to scope 1. Sorry,
I beg your pardon, I was getting excited. The investment piece is really interesting as well, though, isn't it? Because it's even, you know, you can even, if you're minded to, look at who you bank with, look at who your organisational pension fund runs through, and look at what their statements are around investment in green initiatives or fossil fuel initiatives. You know, I know there's a kind of movement emerging at an individual level at the moment where people are starting to assess, you know, who do they bank with and who is their pension fund provider investing in, and are those initiatives fossil fuel intensive or not? And if they are, you know, that's that whole grab your wallet activism of changing provider if the values don't line up with your own sentiment around the environment and sustainability. So there's a lot to think about there as well. And, you know, they're kind of, I guess they're kind of, you know, paperwork initiatives on the investment side, but equally, these are all things that can add up to demonstrate that your organization is taking positive steps to reduce its overall carbon footprint.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think if we focus on scope 1, John, you've done some amazing work in picking apart all the ways in which we could get started within our businesses. So let's dive into that, because I think we've probably got 10 minutes to really dig in.
Yeah, so I'll probably join a few of these together. But yeah, there's you know, if we look at those scope 1s and your real estate, and this is kind of where we started, and again, it hopefully will help our clients as well. But you know, the idea of, you know, just a simple one, lighting. You know, if you've got an old building and you're still using tubular lights, you know, just changing things to LEDs can save you both on your bottom line as well with the bills side of it. But then obviously there's that positive that it's reducing down the amount of energy you're using. Even if you're buying renewable energy in, don't waste it. It's about reducing the amount of energy that you are using. So again, lighting, if we connect that with the idea of smart technology and connecting that with a smart buildings, how can we use technology to reduce down again that wastage, allowing smart technology to control everything from turning off lights when there's nobody around, controlling HVAC systems and heating systems to obviously again just reduce that down. But then you've got a security element, and again that's the idea of smart technology really supporting the reduction of the amount of energy that you use in your office space is very, very much key. The ideas of renewable energy and improving insulation, we've heard a lot about that in recent times. But you know, I think if you are maybe not something that you can jump on straight away, but again, if you are looking, a lot of these are, if you are looking to move office in the future, or you are looking to do some kind of refurbishment, don't maybe discount that. Maybe look to improve the insulation of the building, keep the heat in. You know, we aren't the warmest of countries for the majority of the year. You know, improving that insulation is going to be key. And again, that renewable energy, if you do have the ability to install some kind of renewable energy source, whether that be, you know, it could be something like rain capture, it could be solar panels, it could even be a wind turbine. We've got our local college here in Sheffield has, as part of the build, it has a wind turbine, of which it runs a majority of its services using the power that's generated by that turbine. Then if we look at you know, some of the other really key points, and again behind that idea of behavioral change, when you look at other things that maybe aren't in direct control to your business, but how do you make and help your staff make more sustainable choices? You know, if you want people to buy help them charge them, have charging points outside of your buildings, support that, because I think it was you that coined it really well, Catherine. Range anxiety. People are fearful that, you know,
Oh my
am I going to be
God.
able to get to and from points? And especially if, you know, I live a reasonable distance away from the main office here at Dale. You know, if I had an electric car, which I do want, it would be a worry for me that some days if you forget to charge, I could get to the office, but would I get home? So, you know, you've got those considerations. It's about making those choices easy for staff, and that leads on to that end of trip facilities. Again, if you're looking to update and you're wanting people to do more sustainable choices, having things like company cycle to work schemes is fantastic. But I used to work for a cycle company, and I know how some people love their bikes more than most things, and they are their pride and joy. But adding the facilities for them to be able to lock that bike up so they can be secure in the knowledge that it's not going to get stolen, rather than an outdoor rack, having space indoors so those can be securely stored. But then they'll also want to get a shower. They've just ridden into work, and that idea of feeling comfortable at work. And if they haven't got those facilities available to them, why would you choose to cycle in? You'll default back to using the car. So again, or other public transport, which is better than using a car. But nevertheless, if you can get people to make more sustainable choices by adapting the building and the working environment to support it, you're on to a winner. Then sustainable office materials, and it goes back to probably what we do, you know, helping our clients when they're looking to do changes to the building, trying to give them more sustainable office materials to work with. You know, it may be that they are a little bit more costly, but sometimes it will be worth its weight in gold. And then the idea of upcycling, we've recently been starting, and that's one of the services we're looking to implement more in 2022 is the idea of upcycling furniture. A lot of organizations have very good furniture already in their organization, but when they need to change or refresh, or they have new branding, it doesn't fit anymore. It's not end of life. It still does a fantastic job. Upcycle it. One of the organizations we work with recently, thinking outside the box for that organization, they came to us and said, look, we've had a full brand change and we want to update our furniture, but we really don't want to just throw it away. So we came up with a solution where we reupholstered and refreshed all of the task chairs and the breakout booths with the brand new colors, and then sent them back using a sustainable supply chain for that. And it saved the business thousands, but it also makes it look like a breath of fresh air to this older but still completely usable furniture. And again, that is something that we're really wanting to integrate into a lot of our projects moving forward and offer that as a service.
I tell you what I really like about that as well is that it's keeping you know, it's kind of circular economy activity. It's keeping opportunities within the local economy, because presumably, you know, yeah, you can buy new furniture in from overseas, which is where the majority of stuff these days is manufactured. But actually, when you're encouraging or entering into, you know, the project management of an upcycling project, you're presumably providing revenue to local business people, local tradespeople. And I think that is something that we shouldn't underestimate as well. You know, even when we're thinking about purchasing decisions, all the small things that we can do to keep trade local, that also reduces the carbon footprint. And what I would add to all of this, and I know I'm cutting across you, John, is, and we will talk about it just briefly at the end, but when you're embarking on your carbon footprint reduction program, record everything and remember to tell stories about everything, because all of these things feed into the narrative that you can present to prove that you're actually taking these positive steps, and all your stakeholders want to hear about this now.
Yeah, definitely. And just very quickly, we worked with an organization recently that were able to get funding because of choosing more sustainable resources, using local trades. They could actually get funding from the government as well. So don't discount that it's all about, you know, expenditure. You can actually get some real benefits by taking better and more sustainable choices. I will just run through these because I know we are pressed for time, but I think two other ones for, you know, biophilia and heating and ventilation. Heating and ventilation is probably one of the biggest topics for us at the moment. Organizations are wanting to bring more fresh air into the building, but again, more sustainable, more efficient systems running buildings at the moment. You know, moving away from wet systems would be, you know, is a big factor. But also it has huge, and again, linking back to that mental and well-being statement at the top of this, you know, bringing fresh air into the environment and bringing more of nature into a building just has huge psychological benefits. Ideas of on-site recycling and sustaining workplace. I don't really have time to do the story, but there are a few organizations and a few business parks that have fully sustainable ecosystems where they've everything from beekeeping on site to all of the food waste is recycled and used for energy. One I would suggest having a look at is Croxley Park, and that one's really good. It's really interesting what they do, but pretty much every service is on site, reducing down waste, packaging. It's a fantastic and really interesting one to look at. So definitely take a look at that one if you get a chance, which is Crossley Park.
So in terms of behaviour changes, I mean, I guess ostensibly what we're talking about is getting your entire team, getting the entire workforce involved in the change programme, and looking at together, collectively looking at ways in which you can become more resource efficient and more smart with your energy usage, and more smart in the way that you travel to and from work, to and from meetings, and also having a collective conversation about how you reduce, reuse, recycle, etc. I can almost guarantee that you will find in every corner of your workforce people that have got really clever ideas about how to become more resource efficient and how to reduce your footprint. And people learn from people. We're social creatures. We love sharing ideas for doing things better, more efficiently, etc. And actually, you know, psychologists have determined through research that that's how we change habits most efficiently, when we share ideas and imitate people. So get your team involved 100%.
Yeah, no, I think some of these small changes that's where we're going to be doing, you know, start small. Some of the things that you think bug you in an organization, but I think the recycle culture one is probably one of the ones that I got a lot of. It made me smile when somebody was talking about their recycle culture. They were struggling. They installed recycle bins in certain areas within the building, and they were finding that people weren't using them. So they were giving them that choice, but they still weren't using them. And they realized it was because every one of the members of staff had their own personal bins. So all they did was remove the bins, and then the employees had to go to the main station bins, where they then made more sustainable choices. They could use a recycle bins. I just thought that was just a really simple change that can change a mindset and really just support people to do things in a different way, really, rather than what is the easiest, which is just throwing it into a bin next to them.
Pretty cool. Other ways in which we can reshape our behavior, you know, even thinking about things like, you know, if, as and when we're all back in the office, or the majority of us are in the office, you know, how do we eat together? And is there a way in which we can communally eat that is more efficient than perhaps the way in which we're eating at the moment, which is that we're all going out to, I don't know, Pret and what have you, and each buying individually wrapped sandwiches and so on. Focus on the experience and the journey of this change initiative, because 99 times out of 100, your people, your team will absolutely relish the experience of being part of something that feels as if it's proactively working towards something better. And also, you know, engage in public conversation internally around how you can promote better decision making and so on. Microsoft is a good example. We've got ongoing dialogue with Microsoft, and they're rolling out a global initiative to encourage every single member of their workforce to think in a more considered way about how end-of-life IT hardware products can be repurposed and reused for the betterment of society. Make it fun. make all of these things fun. And I guess, again, the one thing that I would say is, but keep tracking the progress, because all the progress that you're making turns into a story that you can relate to all of your stakeholders internally and externally. We definitely wanted to touch on the topic of whether or not hybrid work is resource efficient. We are sharing this deck, by the way, after the webinar this morning, so you'll be able to turn back to this point. I suspect, because this is a work in progress, and there's going to be more data that reveals itself around the carbon efficiency of hybrid working, we will probably revisit this topic in 2022 in more detail.
Yeah, I think we will be definitely looking into this one in more detail, because I think what we did find was, it's a shame we don't have a little bit more time to talk about it. We did say that if we had time, we could go into this one a little bit more, but I think definitely another webinar, because it's a lot more nuanced. There's a lot more component parts to whether actually this is going to be really support the environment, or actually it's going to hurt the environment more than you actually think it will. So there are, yes, it's definitely a balance. It's definitely a more balancing act, and that one will really boggle the mind after a while when you're trying to get your head around that topic.
So we've talked about scope 2 and we've talked about scope 3. We'll come back, revisit in 2022, assuming we've not blown your heads off this morning. We hope you'll join us. And then to wrap up, you know, if I was to advise any organization right now, I would say start at the beginning, get a carbon footprint evaluation undertaken. There are lots of tools out there. We've done some research. John, you can share your findings, can't you?
Yeah, so we've integrated a carbon footprint calculator. It's only a simple one, but it will get you started and give you the idea of what things you might want to track.
And that's on your website, is that?
And that's on our website, which we will
Awesome.
send out. We'll send out the links to those with the deck after the webinar.
So start with a carbon footprint measurement, create a plan, start small, don't bite off more than you can chew, because people, including yourself, you'll get exhausted. Look at, I don't know, maximum 3 things that you can get started on. So make them manageable, don't make them massive, great big additions to your overall business strategy for 2022. Remember, you're working against a 10-year outline. Record all the progress that you make, because you can turn all that progress into, bluntly, marketing stories for both, you know, prospective customers and prospective staff and people within your local business community. And as I said before, you know, engage the team, because I tell you, they will share with you things that you'd not even thought of, and actually that halves the load anyway. So get everybody involved in developing the solutions, and don't forget to share your progress with your business ecosystem, because we're all starting loosely from the same point, and we all need to share our successes and, you know, the things that haven't gone quite as well, but share, you know, be prepared to use all your progress as documentable small wins. So I think that's it in summary. I know that we've just raced through an hour, and I'm sure all of you, if you didn't know what we've presented to you this morning, are probably feeling a bit bamboozled, as were we when we got started, which is kind of why we made the decision, and Dale has made the decision, to make this an ongoing topic of conversation throughout the course of 2022. So we'll be checking back in at regular intervals and talking about the progress that we're making, the small wins that we've uncovered, and so on and so forth. And back over to you, John.
Yeah, no, that is exactly what we're looking to do. I think we're hoping to inspire, but also educate and lead with it. You know, we're going to engage with a third party, which is going to help us calculate our carbon footprint. And then as we go along and as they teach us, hopefully bring them onto calls, share things via our social, and just hopefully just keep giving little bits of information which help others with their journey, and not be scared to just say, look, we haven't started yet either, but we are getting going now. And I'm not afraid to say that, you know, everybody's got to start somewhere, and hopefully you'll enjoy our journey and you'll get some real good learnings from it, and it will inspire you, and hopefully we can inspire our supply chain as well to do the same. So yeah, hopefully 2022 and beyond, as long as people want to hear about it, we'll keep talking about it.